second. Let me just set this up to record. There we go. All right. So, welcome to the Brown Bag. What's going on? Wow, I've lost count of how many brown bags I've done. It's a lot. It's over a year now. So, and I imagine I'll continue doing this because the news just gets more and more interesting. So today I want to talk about the global numbers, and then really talk about Delta, because that's a big concern right now in the COVID community, and how that affects, how that affects the pandemic. So let's get started. Again, this will be on Facebook Live. If you are on Facebook and you have questions, you can pop them up in the comments. I'll try to monitor those. Otherwise, if you want a link to the Zoom link, please let me know, DM me directly, and I'll try to get that out to you. Okay. And oh yeah, and I will put this up on YouTube. I'm trying to be better about getting that up as soon as I finish this up. So I'll probably put that up immediately after the Brown Bag. So those of you who want to look at this later on YouTube, you'll have that opportunity. Okay. All right. So globally, we are over 177 million cases since the beginning of the pandemic. Again, probably safely double, maybe even triple that number for actual cases. So we're some people would say we're close to having 1 billion folks with COVID, and that might not be inaccurate. Deaths, we're at over close to 4 million. Good news is that in the last 14 days, there has been a decline. The bad news is that you can see that decline is really flattened out, and we're kind of plateauing again at a really high level. We're looking at about 400,000 a day. And so we're, again, being in the US, we may not see that, but there are regions of the world where they're still suffering mightily. So you can see this is counts. The areas where we have high numbers really is South America. South America continues to struggle. The southern part of Africa is also having some worrisome spikes. And Russia has had a little bit of an increase as well as regions of the Middle East. Europe continues to do well, with the exception of the UK, and we'll talk about that. And it seems like South and Southeast Asia have now peaked, and they're now just kind of tipped over and on the decline. So that's good news. You can see that South America continues to struggle. They're at a plateau, or maybe even rising slightly. So in terms of actual counts, they're now equal to Asia. Asia has seen obviously a significant decline since the pandemic has tipped over in India. But of course, Asia is far more populous than South America. So this is quite worrisome. Also worrisome is the numbers in Africa. It looks like it's peaking right now, particularly in the southern parts of Africa. Again, the struggle with trying to interpret what's coming out of Africa is just numbers. They're just lack of a data system, lack of testing, and so we're not quite sure what's going on. We do know South Africa is going through another surge. And South Africa does have a fairly robust testing and data infrastructure. So, and the countries around South Africa, particularly Namibia, is seeing an increase. As far as North America and Europe, the numbers continue to trend down, but again, you're seeing a flattening of numbers. So, yeah, a little bit worrisome signs globally. In terms of countries seeing the highest numbers, India and Brazil are by far the two biggest hotspots, but they're going in different directions. India numbers are continuing to go down. Again, that's probably an underestimate, but they are trending in the positive direction in India. Brazil is just stuck at this level. They have not really budged. They go up and down a little bit, but they're still at about anywhere from 60,000 to close to 100,000 a day. So they continue to struggle. Colombia and Argentina also continue to struggle. Russia has seen an increase. The US is now behind Russia in terms of numbers per day. So that is good news for the US. You're seeing a slight surge in Iran, South Africa, I mentioned. Indonesia is declining. The UK, we'll talk about the UK later on. But yeah, so those are kind of the hot spots. So in terms of per capita, you're seeing, again, it's the per capita numbers are dominated by South America, particularly Colombia and Argentina. Mongolia is seeing a bit of a surge as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. And again, I mentioned the southern parts of Africa and the Middle East. If you look at per capita, you can see that South America is by far has the worst numbers. This is daily new cases per million. So they're about almost 350 per a million, which is extraordinarily high. Europe, North America, I mentioned Europe is next, and then North America. Asia's numbers have dramatically declined, and Africa's is starting to go up. So that's kind of the global situation, Max. In terms of cases per million, Seychelles still leads the way. I think their numbers are kind of fluctuating. I'm going to start excluding the Seychelles and Maldives from this point on, just because they're such small countries and their numbers fluctuate so much that it's really not a fair comparison. But yeah, Seychelles seems to still be struggling, but the numbers are getting better. In terms of larger countries, Uruguay is number 1. Mongolia, I mentioned, is number 2. Colombia, Bahrain is still struggling. So there's regions in the Middle East still struggling. And I think it's mostly due to guest workers. Again, I mentioned this previously: UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, in particular the Gulf states. So Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait tend to use a lot of guest workers, many of them undocumented, and so unvaccinated as well. Those countries have very high vaccination numbers. They've been vaccinating since very early on, but because of the significant number of unvaccinated guest workers, they're still seeing surges. And that's kind of the theme for what we're seeing right now. Again, back to my theme of a tale of two pandemics. It is a very different pandemic for those who are unvaccinated versus vaccinated right now. That goes for countries as well as people. And I'll be revisiting this theme throughout. So that's why you're seeing some high numbers in Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman. Is probably being driven by the guest worker population being unvaccinated. Okay, but I also want you to notice that the number of countries that are in South America on this list: Uruguay, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay. Let's see, Guyana. So unfortunately, South American countries are bearing the brunt of the pandemic right now. But there's some new countries here as well that is worrisome. I mentioned Namibia with some really high numbers right now. Probably because they're right next to South Africa, they're kind of getting a surge there. Botswana as well is seeing a bit of a surge. There's also some worrisome numbers out of Cuba. So that's where we are globally. Here's where we're seeing the changes. You can see South America continues to kind of, again, they seem to go, and I'll go over the time trends for each of these regions individually, but you can see that Brazil and Bolivia have seen increases, as well as Ecuador. That is Honduras has seen a bit of a surge. I mentioned Cuba's surge, Russia, Mongolia, Myanmar. Those numbers are so unreliable. it's hard to really determine what's going on there. And then the southern part of Africa seeing a significant surge, as well as, of course, the UK. So let's look at those regions individually real quick. This is cases per million, so per capita. This is the South American region. You see Uruguay is kind of all over the place. They're going up and down, up and down. Same with Colombia. Colombia, well, is seeing a bit of an increase. Argentina's numbers are, excuse me. Argentina's numbers recently have gone down, but again, they've been highly unstable. Suriname, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia. So again, Bolivia, it looks like numbers are going up as well. Brazil is kind of stuck in this really high plateau, and they kind of go up and down within this plateau, but we really haven't seen a significant decline in numbers in Brazil in a while. So South America continues to struggle. Even countries with high levels of vaccination, like Uruguay and Chile, they are still struggling. And we'll go into the reasons why that's probably happening in a bit. East Asia, with the exception of Mongolia, is seeing a bit of, not a bit of a spike, a significant spike. Things are okay. Philippines is kind of at a high level, but Japan's recent surge, as well as Taiwan's recent surge, seems like they were quite temporary, and they're now going down, which is good for Japan because they're still planning on having the Olympics there for some odd reason. Taiwan, South Korea's numbers have stayed low. They have done actually a pretty good job of kind of preventing the surges that we saw in Taiwan and Japan. Southeast Asia and South Asia, you're seeing overall good news. The numbers, India has peaked and is going down. Same with Nepal, so that's good news. Malaysia, seems like their shutdown is working, and their numbers are in the decline. Sri Lanka as well. Indonesia is seeing a bit of a surge right now. Again, probably due to the same reason that we saw a surge in Malaysia, and that's from Ramadan. Of course, Indonesia is a majority Muslim country. By the way, just an FYI, the most populous Muslim country in the world by far is Indonesia. And so that's probably what's causing the surge. Bhutan, after their surge, it's gone down. And then Bangladesh, I mentioned, there's a little bit of a surge. Again, quite possibly due to Ramadan. But overall, it seems like in South Asia, numbers are getting better. In the Middle East, Bahrain's numbers have declined significantly. Bahrain is another one of those countries that's very small, so small changes, small number of cases will alter their per capita numbers quite dramatically. That's probably what we're seeing. But also Bahrain is started to institute vaccinations for undocumented workers as well. They're realizing how important that is, and they're starting to vaccinate guest workers. Kuwait and Oman are seeing a bit of a surge. Same with Iran and Iraq and the UAE. So again, driven largely by a combination of Muslim religious holidays and guest workers that are unvaccinated. Even though, like I mentioned, Oman and UAE and Qatar and Bahrain have some of the highest levels of vaccination in the world, yet they're still experiencing surges. This is a concern for me. Namibia touched on 400 cases per million people. That is extraordinarily high. You can see by far the highest we've seen in the African countries. I include Tunisia here, even though they're not in the southern part of Africa, because they are also seeing a surge. Botswana, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, of course, are all kind of bordering on each other in the southern part of the continent. They're all seeing significant surges. So that's really quite worrisome. Just because they just don't have the resources to deal with a significant surge. These are countries that have done extraordinarily well, in my opinion, given the lack of resources. Again, using public health tools like isolation, contact tracing. But again, you cannot expect countries to continue using these tools for extended periods of time. They just do not work beyond, I would say, just a few months. And you have to implement other measures, particularly vaccinations. And unfortunately, those vaccinations are not available. We cannot expect, these countries have done, I just want to emphasize, these countries have done an extraordinary job controlling this pandemic using just really quite basic tools, but utilizing them extremely well. Basic public health tools. But again, you cannot expect these countries to continue that for over a year. They need vaccines. Challenges in guest workers. Yeah. Well, one of the challenges, of course, is that a lot of guest workers are undocumented. And so they're illegal. I mean, they're undocumented, so they're technically not supposed to be there. So how do you monitor that population, especially with 2 doses? You could administer Johnson & Johnson. In fact, Johnson & Johnson is perfect for situations like this. But, Raven has joined broadcast. But I mean, that is always going to be a challenge, particularly if you're going to try to monitor them. And this is also a population that is not going to want to be monitored. It's not going to want to be approached by government officials because they are undocumented. So that's probably the biggest challenge. It is no longer a supply issue. These are countries that are fairly wealthy and can afford to buy even the mRNA vaccines and have the infrastructure to deal with them. So that's not a supply issue. It's not a implementation issue. It's more of just a trust issue between undocumented guest workers and government officials. So yeah, I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge. Also, if guest workers are going back and forth to their home countries, again, there's the logistics of that. I think a lot of folks don't kind of take for granted the infrastructure that we have in this country, we'll just, people, it's easy to follow up for a second dose, when in fact, it's really tough to do. Even within the US, that's been a struggle to get people to follow up, to monitor them, to make sure they come in for their second dose. It's not as easy as you think. And that's true in the US, but in a country where, data infrastructure may be a challenge, and combine that with undocumented guest workers, it becomes even more of a challenge. Okay. This is Europe. I'm sticking to the 4 countries that are seeing some surges recently, and that includes Spain, the UK, Russia, and Portugal. Seeing the surges. Of course, the most worrisome surge is in the UK, mainly because they have a very high level of vaccination. But Russia is also going through a surge. In fact, if you recall, Russia has more cases, more from a case count, than the US now. The US is now 6 in cases. And then finally, North America. Cuba seeing a little bit of a surge. Dominican Republic seems to have tipped over a bit, so things are getting better. Haiti also looks like things are getting a bit better. US and Canada. Canada continues to decline significantly. They are now below the US in terms of per capita numbers. They were above the US for a while. So Canada is doing quite well, but the US is as well. But again, you can see signs that it's flattening out a little bit. Okay, we'll talk about those trends in a bit. And then finally, I did separate out Central America from North America and South America. A lot of people say, oh, the Panama increase is due to it's because they border on Colombia, and Colombia is seeing really high numbers. What people don't realize is that there is no land border between Colombia and Panama. In fact, there's no connections there. Little known fact. Well, actually, probably a lot of people know. There's a region called Darien Gap. There's nothing there. There's no roads going across it. Yeah, I guess you can walk it, but a lot of people get killed in the jungles. Kind of a lawless area as well. So there's no land border. So Panama is probably due to, other reasons they're seeing a surge. But anyways, Costa Rica peaked quite high, and they're now seeing a decline. So that's good news. But Panama is seeing an increase. Same with Honduras. Mexico's numbers seem to do okay from a per capita standpoint, but their deaths are really high. So again, part of the problem with Mexican numbers is they are not doing any testing. And so the number of cases is really underestimated in Mexico, significantly underestimated. So those are the numbers of cases. In terms of deaths, what's really concerning about this graph is that you would hope that this graph starts to level off, but it's not. It's staying at a consistent slope. So the rate of deaths per day is staying consistent. And that's really concerning. You can see that it's kind of fluctuating, but our deaths per day, so this is new confirmed deaths per day, it's stuck right around, it's not really going down it's not really going down. We're still above what we were experiencing last fall, not too far from the peaks over this winter. In fact, it's gone up a little bit recently. So deaths continue to be a problem in most of the world. In terms of counts, it's really India and Brazil that's driving those numbers, number of deaths as far as counts are concerned. You can see India, again, this is an underestimate. In fact, there's a news report, I forgot to link this, because of the monsoon season, of course, the Ganges River is rising. And along with that, bodies are starting to wash ashore. It's very grim news coming out of India. Just to kind of emphasize how underestimated the number of deaths in India has been. If you recall, crematoriums were so inundated and it was so costly to cremate bodies that poor families were simply leaving their loved ones' remains in the Ganges River, which is of course a holy river. Typically, among Hindus, you cremate the body and scatter the ashes in the Ganges River. Well, again, they couldn't afford to cremate, so they just placed the bodies in the Ganges, and they're starting to wash ashore. So it's a grim reminder of how underestimated the number of deaths have and how horrific this recent surge in India was. So that 3,000, 4,000 deaths is probably underestimated by some of us estimate that it's underestimated by a factor of 10 or more. So Brazil is second at 2,000. So Brazil continues to struggle. Then Colombia and Argentina. Notice again, the US is fourth. Russia is now exceeded in terms of deaths per day, exceeded the US. Then Peru, Mexico. This is why I say Mexico's case counts are probably underestimated to a significant degree because they are on the top 10 in terms of deaths per day. And you can see Japan showed up here, which is interesting. The surge didn't seem like a lot compared to some other countries, but remember, Japan is it's a much older country, so their case fatality is much higher because they are a much older population. And so they show up in the top 25 in terms of deaths per day, even though in terms of cases a day, they're not even in the top 25. So in terms of deaths per million, though, per capita, you can see that just South America just dominates this metric, with Colombia and Brazil and Argentina leading the way. So you can see Paraguay at 18, they're still having an extremely high per capita number. Anything close to 20 is extremely high. Then Suriname, then Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, Brazil. What's extraordinary about this is the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 countries in terms of deaths per million are from South America. So both in cases and deaths, South America continues to struggle. Continues to really struggle with this pandemic, and really there doesn't seem to be any relief in sight. Even if they started vaccination, you're not going to see the effects of that for a while. And with Delta, and we'll talk about that, with Delta, your unvaccinated population is at that much higher risk for COVID right now because of the transmissibility of Delta. Okay, so what's also concerning is Namibia is showing up in this list, as well as a few other countries that we haven't seen, like Botswana as well. So the southern part of Africa, we need to keep an eye on. I've been saying this for a while, that we may see surges there. We're starting to see that. So in particular, Namibia, it's not a wealthy country. It's on the western shores of Africa, just north of South Africa. Very dry, arid country, not particularly wealthy. So we're going to have to keep an eye on it there. In terms of changes in deaths, you can see that South America has seen positive increases. Same with southern parts of Africa, Mongolia I mentioned, and Russia. Those are the main areas we're seeing surges. Excuse me, I'm just trying to check on the comments here. Okay. Okay, let's talk about vaccinations globally. We're now at about 30 doses per 100 people globally. Not great, but we're getting there slowly, very slowly, too slowly. As far as the number of people who received at least one dose, China's leading the way. They really kind of ramped up their vaccination efforts. They do have a significant manufacturing capacity with the Sinovac, Sinopharm. The data for the efficacy, we're still unclear how effective these are. The Chinese haven't been really forthcoming with numbers, but the numbers we do have, they're not terribly effective compared to the mRNA vaccines, but still, it's something, right? I mean, it is something, but well, we'll talk about this. I think we are seeing a difference in vaccine efficacy. And this is why we're seeing countries like Chile, like Uruguay, like Mongolia that have serious surges, even though they vaccinated, in some cases, more than 50% of the population. But when you're vaccinating mostly with vaccines that are maybe 50% efficacy, it's just not going to be as effective as using a vaccine that is 95% efficacy. And I think that's what we're discovering right now. India is second. India's got a long ways to go. Remember, India and China have about the same population, but India is only at a third of the number of vaccines administered that China has. Then US, Brazil is finally starting to catch up. UK, you can see that the Western European countries are starting to catch up. South Korea is starting to catch up quite a bit, as well as Japan. I think that's good news, because I think the East Asian countries, as well as New Zealand and Australia, are discovering that. I think they got a little complacent. There was no urgency to vaccinate because they've been controlling it for so long. But like I keep saying, those methods are at best short-term. Social isolation, quarantine, contact tracing, those are short-term solutions. You cannot expect people to do that for long-term periods of time. Eventually, you have to open up the economy. Eventually, you have to start allowing visitors and starting up trade. That's when vaccines are critical. And the Taiwanese and the Japanese surges are harsh reminders that yes, vaccination you have to have some urgency to vaccinate as soon as you can. Japan did not really Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, I think, dropped the ball a little bit. These are wealthy countries that could have afforded to negotiate and get vaccines into their countries early, but they had no urgency because the numbers were low. In terms of share of people who have received at least one dose, Iceland is now leading the way. I'm excluding Seychelles and Maldives and some of the smaller countries. So like countries like Malta have extremely high, again, they're just apples and oranges comparisons, quite honestly. These are small, tiny countries, micro countries. I'm not including them in the analysis. I'm just including major countries. And again, the definition of major is my own definition. So anyways, so there are like countries like Malta that have really extraordinarily high vaccination rates, but these are very small countries. So Iceland at almost 68% of the population with one dose. So that's extraordinary. Canada is second now. So Canada's really ramped up their vaccination. Again, remember, Canada has a campaign, has a policy of vaccinating their going one dose first. So prioritizing one dose, not worrying about the second dose, kind of similar to the UK. There is a significant drawback to this, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. So Canada remains vulnerable, even though they have 65, 66% of the population with at least one dose because of that one dose policy. Israel is third. You know, Israel has not budged from this. And that's a bit concerning. They have not budged from about 63%. Now, I imagine, I'm not quite sure, and I should check whether the Israelis have approved Pfizer for 12 to 15-year-olds. Remember, it's not up to the pharmacist, not up to Pfizer to determine that. It's up to the individual countries' FDAs or their equivalents to approve vaccines for different age groups. I'm not sure if Israel has opened that up. They may not have, and that's why they're stuck there. But it also indicates that Israel has a hardcore group of vaccine hesitant or vaccine deniers, because that has not moved, and that is concerning. 63% is not a lot in terms of trying to get, control outbreaks within the country. You really want to see closer to 70 and 80%. Some of this, like I said, could be due to the fact that they haven't approved it for under 16. They haven't approved it for under 12. And when we do that, you might see a surge and they may get up to 70, 80%. I don't know. It's hard to, we'll have to see. UK is at 62% along with Chile. This is why I mentioned the surges in Chile are concerning because they have 62% with at least one dose. That's far higher than the US. But again, the vast majority of the Chilean vaccination program is based on the Chinese vaccines, their inactivated vaccines, which, again, their efficacy is estimated to be about 50%. Against Delta, it may be even less, maybe closer to 55 or 45 to 40%. It's better than nothing, but that still leaves 50 to 55% of the population that are vaccinated still susceptible, particularly to a variant that may have some ability to evade immunity. That's probably why we're seeing such, surges in Mongolia, in Chile, in these countries that have high levels of vaccination. Because number one, Delta is that much more transmissible, and number two, these are vaccines that are not very effective compared to the mRNA vaccines. So we're starting to see a difference. I mean, earlier on, we just wanted to get people vaccinated. We said, just get the vaccine that you can. But now we are seeing the difference in countries where very few of the vaccines are the highly effective mRNA. I think Mongolia, most of the vaccine are the Chinese vaccines. So they are still susceptible to surges. Even if Mongolia vaccinated 100% of their population, the efficacy of 50% means 50% of the population is still not fully protected and also susceptible. It is going to make a difference. I'm not saying this to discourage people from seeking out, Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca or the Chinese vaccines, but at the same time, we have to be honest about this, that a 95% effective vaccine is going to be much more effective than a 50% efficacy vaccine. By the way, the US is down below Hungary now, below Qatar, below Mongolia. Yeah, we're not doing great. So in terms of pace of vaccination, so doses administered per 100 people per day, Iceland's vaccinating 4% of their population a day. That's pretty extraordinary. So again, it's a smaller country, but still, that's great. South Korea is also ramping up. Both my parents who are living in Korea now both vaccinated fully with Pfizer, so that's great news. Cuba is also vaccinated. They're realizing they're seeing a bit of a surge. They're vaccinating very quickly. Of course, the Cuban medical and public health system is very robust. And so I'm not surprised by that. Turkey Suriname, Germany, again, the Germans, the Western Europeans are starting to catch up. China's starting to catch up. And the US is not even on this. We're at like 0.3, so we're not even on this list. Yeah. And in terms of people fully vaccinated, so again, Iceland is really ramping things up. Canada, they're at more than 60% with 1 dose, but 2 doses, they're less than 20%. Same with Finland. Finland is also really lagging behind. I should look up Finland's policy towards vaccination. They may be using the same strategy. There is some merit to that, but Delta's changing that equation, and I'll get to that in a second. Okay, Delta's really changing that equation of maybe making this strategy of vaccinating everyone with 1 dose a little more risky. Where's the U.S. here? U.S. is down below Hungary. Yeah, not great. All right, so map-wise, of course, I mean, Africa is just struggling with vaccination. We're trying. It's great news that the G7 is going to donate 1 billion doses. I'm just afraid. One of the things that I think a lot of scientists, epidemiologists, public health practitioners are worried about is that we're going to play political games with those vaccines. Ideally, they would give this to WHO and WHO administer it, minimizing politics. But unfortunately, already the Russians and the Chinese are playing that political game, of course, right? And, Chinese in particular are using vaccines to curry favors in smaller countries. Hate seeing that, but I'm not going to mix this up with geopolitics. It is unfortunately being mixed in, though. As far as continent's concerned, Asia's really ramped up. The vast majority of vaccines being administered is being administered in Asia, and particularly in China and in India, of course. So that's going to really dominate. To me, this is the concern. Africa continues to be just a small proportion of the vaccines being administered. And North America numbers are going down because our numbers in the US are going down. And then an income group, lower, it's mostly, this is dominated by those upper middle income countries. China and India, by the way, are considered upper middle income. So those increases in those countries is what's driving this. But in low income, which is sub-Saharan Africa, lower middle income, we're just not vaccinating those folks. So the inequities, the lack of justice continues. Let's talk about Delta and the UK. So we're seeing a surge in the UK. We're approaching 10,000 cases per day. And that was what we were seeing at the tail end of the last surge before they really ramped up their vaccination program. And so this is concerning. In a country that has such high levels of vaccinations, this is highly concerning. It's one of those countries I was been paying attention to, along with Israel and the US. Countries with high levels of vaccination, particularly vaccines that are more highly effective. The mRNA vaccines, as well as AstraZeneca. Now, we'll talk about the difference between AstraZeneca and the mRNA vaccines. The UK is a little bit different than the US and Israel, in that the US and Israel, the vaccination campaign is mostly driven by the mRNA vaccines. Yeah, in the US, we have a small proportion of folks with the J&J vaccine, but I think 90% plus of all the vaccinated folks in the US have either the Moderna or the Pfizer. Same thing with Israel. In fact, Israel's majority, I believe, Pfizer and Moderna. The UK, though, about half, I believe half the UK vaccination campaign consisted of the Oxford AstraZeneca viral vector vaccine, which does have a lower efficacy. So keep that in mind when I talk about this. So UK surge. So far with deaths, we're not seeing a significant surge, a little bit increase. Now, with any surges in these countries, expect deaths and hospitalizations to not be as high, mainly because these vaccine campaigns have emphasized vaccinating those at greater risk for hospitalization and deaths. So even if we see numbers that are as high as the previous surges, the number of deaths and hospitalizations should be significantly lower because our vaccination rates among the most vulnerable are extremely high. That's true in Israel, that's true in the US, that's true in the UK. So we're not seeing much in terms of death. Now the data shows right now this surge is mostly in younger folks. Okay, so we wouldn't expect the deaths to really get very high. Same with hospitalizations, although there is a little bit of an increase. The R naught is now at about 1.5, so it is growing. It is definitely growing. So what is going on? So what's going on in the UK? 90% of the new cases right now are Delta. So the Delta variant, the B1617, specifically B1617.2 variant, is known as Delta. This is the first discovered in the UK and India, what really drove the Indian pandemic, the Delta. They called it the double mutation because two of the mutations that we've seen on other variants showed up in the same variant. It doesn't mean it's doubly more dangerous, doubly more transparent, just double mutant. So two of the same mutations on the spike protein showed up in the same variant. Okay, so that is the Delta variant. Again, under the new scheme of Alpha, Beta, Delta, Gamma. I was never in the Greek system. I don't know the order. Sorry, I don't speak Greek. But the Delta variant. That's what we're talking about right now. Okay, so the UK right now, the number of cases doubling every 11 days. About 90% is Delta. Anecdotal data suggests, not anecdotal, so evidence suggests, this is not anecdotal actually, evidence suggests that Delta is about 40 to 60% more transmissible than Alpha. Alpha was the original UK variant. Alpha was also about 40 to 50% more transmissible than the wild type original Wuhan variant. The original, the OG SARS-CoV-2. Sorry, I should probably try not to be hip. Anyways, so more transmissible. As far as how deadly it is, that there is some evidence that it results in more hospitalization, but that is right now there's no evidence of that. We do know it's more transmissible. Okay, so how does that affect it? Well, before I get into that, okay, so here is the sequence variants. Now the sequencing in the UK is excellent. They have far more sequencing than the US. They've really sequenced a lot more than we do. And so this is very, very good data. It looks like you can see that this purple is Delta and this is date. So you can see that from 1/5/2001 to about 2-3 weeks ago, Delta is really dominating now. Okay, it's almost, like I said, more than 90% of new cases right now in the UK are the Delta variant. Okay, now, so 90% of the UK surge is Delta. We know that Delta is more transmissible. Okay, the other factor here, though, is that the vaccines are still highly effective against Delta. This is good data coming out of the UK. Why is it coming out of the UK? Because they have the best data. They have a large number of people vaccinated. So we have good data. Now, some folks ask, well, what about Johnson & Johnson? This data on AstraZeneca and Pfizer. What about Johnson & Johnson? We just don't have that data because the UK hasn't really used a lot of Johnson & Johnson. And so we just don't have the numbers. But we do have really robust numbers on Pfizer and AstraZeneca because those are the two vaccines that were utilized the most in the UK. And initial data suggests that the Pfizer vaccine is 88% effective against symptomatic disease. Okay, against Delta. Okay, now that's compared to 93% against Alpha. So there's a little bit of degradation of efficacy, not a lot, but still a little bit of degradation. Against hospitalizations, however, So this is just symptomatic. Against hospitalizations, they estimate Delta is about 93. I mean, they estimate that Pfizer is about 93% effective against hospitalization. So that's really good news. Okay, so these are still highly effective vaccines. With the AstraZeneca, there was 60% effective against symptomatic disease. Okay, compared to 66 against Alpha. Okay, so again, a little bit of degradation, but still effective. AstraZeneca, however, against hospitalizations, the data I saw, about 90% effective against hospitalizations. And that's what really matters, right? So still highly effective. Even the AstraZeneca is still highly effective. Okay. Now, notice that this says after 2 doses. So 2 weeks after 2 doses, when there's full efficacy. The bad news is after 1 dose, there's more degradation of efficacy. Only 33%. Only 20 to 30% effective. 20 to 35% effective after the 1 dose. It's against Alpha, it was about 50% effective, but against Delta is about 20. So 1 dose really isn't giving you much protection at all. So those folks with only 1 dose are still at risk, as pretty significantly elevated risk for contracting Delta. This is why I say Canada's approach right now is looking very risky, because they're still going to be very prone to surges with Delta, because all those folks with 1 dose, they're not being they're not protected very well at all against Delta. Excuse me 1 second. Allergies. Nowadays, if you have a sniffle or a cough, you have to say, hey, trust me, it's allergies. It's where we go. All right, so yeah, so this is really fascinating. We're trying to still think, immunologists are still trying to figure out why after 2 doses is still really the degradation efficacy is fairly minimal, but after 1 dose, it's a significant degradation efficacy. So that second dose really is important for, really important for Delta. There is a good question. Some folks on my Facebook page asked about Johnson & Johnson, because that's a 1-dose vaccine. And the answer is, I don't know. And I think we just don't have enough people diagnosed with, vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson, particularly in areas where Delta is predominant, to really have that data. My guess, looking at what we're seeing right now, is that the degradation of Johnson & Johnson is probably significant. I don't know. Might be time for boosters. But again, key takeaway here is, particularly with Pfizer and Moderna, 2 doses is still highly effective against Delta. 1 dose, not so much. Okay, so more now. So that is the data coming out. How do we get this data? Well, the fact is, the vast majority of people in this surge in the UK that are being hospitalized, that are contracting COVID, are unvaccinated. Okay, this is the data from their ongoing cohort of healthcare workers. So they were recruited at the very onset of the vaccination campaign. Now, all these workers are vaccinated. They were required to vaccinate. They were the first to be vaccinated. And you can see this is the number of cases, and these are the number of participants who are being tested with PCR. Now, what's nice about this is they're tested weekly. All healthcare workers in the UK for NHS are tested weekly for infection through PCR. You can see there's just basically no cases. Again, everyone who's hospitalized right now during the surge are unvaccinated. Very few are vaccinated. Here's more definitive data. So here's Delta cases since the 1st of February, 32,000. These are the ones who were diagnosed 14 days post dose 2. Okay. And you can see that's about 5%, which about 95% of efficacy, not bad. Okay. So again, 2-dose vaccines are highly effective. I believe this is both AstraZeneca and Pfizer. I don't think they differentiated the two. Okay, so the folks being hospitalized right now are those who are vaccinated. So the vaccines are effective. Especially after 2 doses, but you're still seeing a surge. Surges in the unvaccinated. And this is why I say this is a tale of 2 pandemics. It's quickly, we're now seeing that among the vaccinated, things are getting better. Your risk of contracting disease is significantly lower than unvaccinated. So yeah, so that is good news, bad news. So, but at the same time, we have to remember, the more virus is circulating, even among the unvaccinated, the risk of breakthrough infections among vaccinated increases. Okay, so that's the bad news. So we're gonna talk about that in the US as well. But right now, the UK, it is driven by those who are unvaccinated or with 1 dose. Okay, so when you see these surges now, we can almost kind of separate out vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Among the vaccinated, things are looking awesome. Among the unvaccinated, things, and I showed you that Washington Post article that from a couple of weeks ago that shows that, and I can redo those numbers too and see what it's like, see what the incidence rate is like among the unvaccinated. It still is, it's in some states it's as bad as it ever was. So among the unvaccinated, yeah, things are still really, really bad. Let's talk about the US. Numbers are still good, but you can see it's it kind of flat out a little bit. It's just kind of in a plateau. So again, in the US, it's a tale of 2 countries, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Let's take a look closer. So the entire East Coast is doing quite extraordinarily well. Same with the upper Midwest. Missouri is seeing some little surges in rural areas near the Ozarks, okay, and also in the northern part bordering on Idaho. West Texas has some rural areas that have high numbers. Same with western Colorado, and Utah, unfortunately, seeing a surge. The Pacific Northwest is still struggling a bit. By the way, these states are also states where Delta seems to be the predominant strain. The Delta, again, any strain, any variant that is 50% more transmissible will quickly become the dominant strain, which makes sense. Evolution, right? Any strain that has an advantage in greater transmission is going to become the predominant. That's what's happening in the US, okay? Our sequencing compared to the UK is not great. So the numbers aren't as definitive, but the numbers we do have show that Utah, Colorado, the Pacific Northwest, the dominant strain right now is Delta. So is it surprising that we see the surges? Not really. Okay. In terms of numbers, Florida is number 1. Texas saw a bit of a surge driven by those rural counties, seeing a little bit of an increase. I would say surge, increase. California continues to do well. They're at 2 per 100,000. Missouri seen a surge. Colorado is trending at least in the right direction. Washington, New York, Arizona, all trending in the right direction. In terms of per capita, Wyoming is still leading the way. Then Missouri, Colorado and Utah are kind of 3rd and 4th. So we're not doing great from a per capita standpoint in terms of Utah. Numbers are not doing great right now. You probably noticed that our numbers have started to hit 300-400 again. Not a serious surge, but definitely we're not trending in the right direction anymore. And we'll go over Utah numbers a bit. In terms of the states doing the best, South Dakota, Vermont. So with the exception of South Dakota, really, the New England states are doing extraordinarily well. um, as well as Maryland, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. They're at 1 or 2 per 100,000. So those are really, really great numbers. As far as states that have seen a surge or increases, Arkansas and Mississippi kind of lead the way. You're seeing some surges, and that could be due to tourism. Arkansas and Missouri, the Ozark region, a lot of tourism. Branson, the Ozarks, right? A lot of tourism there. Could that be driving some of it, especially dating back to Memorial Day? Quite possibly, yes. Okay, this might also be driving the cases in Utah as well. Memorial Day, when there was a lot of travel. Then you see Kansas, Texas, Nevada, Mississippi, Hawaii, and New Jersey kind of plateaued. But again, their per capita numbers aren't bad. So in terms of deaths, deaths per 100,000, Michigan still leads the way, but Wyoming is close behind. Georgia, Michigan's seen some great improvements in numbers, so they're still, coming off of their huge peak that they had a few weeks ago. So deaths are still lagging a little bit, but things are getting better there. Deaths aren't really the story in the U.S. though. I mean, yes, we still have a significant number of deaths from COVID, but really it's because of our vaccination strategy of vaccinating those who are at greatest risk. Deaths aren't really as big of an issue. They never will be bigger. I don't think we'll see peaks in deaths that we saw in the past. Talk about vaccination quickly in the US. We're 53%, and that number is it's going up slowly, way too slowly. We are not on track as a country to reach President Biden's goal of 70% of eligible adults vaccinated. We're a little bit behind. I think the bigger story, though, is that some states have exceeded that rate and other states will never reach. I don't think they'll ever reach that point. And that's a problem, too. We can't, we got to look at local metrics as well as kind of more global metrics, okay, especially in terms of vaccination rates. Because as long as there are regions where there's high percentage of unvaccinated folks, you're creating a haven for SARS-CoV-2. So 12 and up, we're doing okay. I mean, 62% of eligible, at least one dose, and 52% fully vaccinated. 18 and up, numbers increase a little bit more. But if you look at all ages, we're 53%. Love to get to about 70, 80%. We'll see if that actually happens. Of course, a big part of that will be to vaccinate children. Okay, under 12. We need to get that approved. Hopefully, we'll start getting data from that. I'm hoping by fall. Doses administered today. Seems like there's a little bit of an increase. I would say I would not read too much into that increase. That may be reporting issues. I think we're at a plateau right now. We're about a million people a day. But that's only about 0.33% of the population. 0.3% of the population a day. So that is not a great pace. So as far as states doing the best, again, the Northeast and the West Coast. Northeast, Upper Midwest, and the West Coast are doing the best right now. Lagging behind are the Deep South, particularly Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Idaho and Wyoming. I'll show you more details on that. Fully vaccinated, same issue. This is by region. You can see just big swaths of rural areas in particular that have very low vaccination rates, particularly in the South, as well as parts of Idaho and Wyoming. So you can definitely see kind of a rural-urban divide here, which also corresponds to political leanings. This is by state. I know there's a lot of data here. Just want you to notice that again, the difference, 73% of Vermont has at least one dose. Okay. So that's almost their full eligible population, if you think about it. And then you have Mississippi at 35%, so less than half. So that's Yeah. Yeah. Utah is right around here, about 47% with one population. Again, it's kind of an unfair comparison because Utah, of course, is far younger than any other state. So we're in pace to hit 68%, not quite 70%. But again, there's variations by state, significant variations by state. So these are the states that have less than half of adults, not the total population of adults, eligible adults that have received one dose. Mississippi is at 44%, and I have doubts whether they'll even hit 50% ever. Same with Alabama, Louisiana, Wyoming, Tennessee. So again, deep southern states along with Idaho and Wyoming, and a few other states. Again, yes, you probably did notice every one of these states voted Republican last presidential election. Yeah, every one of them. Yeah. These are the states that are making progress, but they probably won't hit 70% at the current pace. That includes Utah. We'll hit about 64%. It's far better than those previous states, but still not at 70%. Again, I think we're burdened by the fact that we have the youngest population as well. I don't want to keep using that as an excuse, but I don't think vaccination rates in Utah are as bad as people think they are. I think it is, again, a function of the fact that a bigger proportion of our population is under the age of 12 than any other state. Okay, so they're just flat out not eligible to be vaccinated. Okay, so anyways, so Utah's not doing terribly. So these are the states and again, politically, they're kind of a mixed bag as well. And then finally, these are states that will reach it in some cases within days. So they're really, really close. And then finally, these states have already surpassed 70%. Heck, some states, 80% of eligible adults have been vaccinated. Hawaii and Vermont are right up there, along with Massachusetts. So again, the New England states, along with Hawaii and a few other outliers, again, these are all West Coast or Northeastern states or upper Midwest states that are doing extraordinarily well in terms of vaccinations. So that's what's important here, not the overall country at 70%, but we have to look at kind of states and even counties. I remember last week I kind of went over current rates, per capita rates of COVID in Utah by small areas and correlated that with vaccination rates. And I found a positive correlation. So we have to look at smaller areas because as long as, we could have 90% vaccination coverage in the US, but if there's one state where it's less than 50%, you're still going to have a population that can sustain SARS-CoV-2. Okay, so you have to look at these, not only the national figures, but also the smaller regional figures as well. Because as long as there's enough of a community of folks who are living in close proximity, who aren't getting vaccinated, it's going to put us all at risk. Okay, here's estimated time to 70% at the current pace. Alabama and Mississippi will not reach it for more than a year. That's sad. Wyoming, 10 months. And then you can see Utah's at 3 months. So at this pace, and it seems like the pace is fairly steady, we should hit 70%, but not until, close to September. And this is why the hesitancy. So this is the latest data. I showed you this before. It hasn't changed, but you can see the degree of hesitancy in the upper Midwest as well as the South, particularly Alabama, but also Kentucky and Ohio and parts of Arizona. As you can see, Utah's not terrible, especially the Wasatch Front. The rural areas, a little bit more hesitancy, but we don't have as many folks living in the rural areas. The vast majority of the population of Utah lives in the Wasatch Front, and the hesitancy is relatively low there. Will we reach the levels of vaccination as New England states? No, of course not. Just a very different mindset and approach. But Utah is not terrible. Now, what the Delta does is basically yes, we are at 53% with one dose, 40 something percent with two doses. However, and the numbers have been going down because, yeah, those 40 to 50% of folks who've been vaccinated, who have immunity, is going to affect the size of any surges. You're basically cutting the number of susceptible hosts in half. That is going to affect transmission. That is going to affect the surges. The surges are going to be much less because there's just fewer people in the population susceptible. Okay, that's basic infectious disease epidemiology, right? However, the other factor you have to throw in is transmissibility. So you have a variant that is 50% more transmissible than alpha, which was then 50% more transmissible than the original wild type. So you have a far more transmissible variant in that smaller population. So you're still going to have, this actually can create a bigger surge. Delta needs fewer susceptible hosts to effectively spread because it's so efficient at spreading. So what it does is we have to ramp up the degree of vaccination to be able to control for a more transmissible variant. So 70% may not be enough. We might have to bump it up to 80% to effectively control it. That's what the more transmissible variant does. Okay, so even as we vaccinate, even as we get up to 50, 60% with two doses, there's still that 40% that have one dose or no vaccines that are still highly susceptible to a much more transmissible disease. So with Delta, we're gonna see surges. But again, the surges are gonna be mostly in the unvaccinated. It's two pandemics right now. Very different experiences. For those who are vaccinated, it's still relatively safe. Your risk of contracting COVID is extremely low. For the unvaccinated, it's as bad as it's ever been, if not worse, possibly. That's what the Delta variant has done. It changed the equation. For those who are unvaccinated, even if it's a smaller and smaller population, it's still, because it's much more transmissible, it's still going to probably surge. We're going to see surges in Delta, possibly even this summer. 325 new cases today. So will we see, I mean, we might not see the peaks that we did, and we're definitely not going to see the level of hospitalizations and deaths, but we are going to see surges. By some models, and I'll show you that in a second, we might see more increasing. The surges might be just as high as the peaks. So let's go over Utah numbers real quick, and then I'll kind of revisit this in terms of Utah numbers. As you can see, we're seeing a little bit of an increase. I mean, it's, looking at this map, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's concerning. We hit 400 again this last week. I mean, not nearly as bad as 4,000, 5,000, but still, it's not going in the right direction. So in terms of cases, I mean, obviously Salt Lake, Utah, Weber, Davis, the Wasatch Front leads the way, but there's a little bit of a concerning number, concerning surge in Uinta County, which is a fairly rural county. So, as well as Washington County. So, bit of a surge here. And you can see that in Salt Lake, Utah, Weber, and Davis, we're seeing 50, 60, 30 to 60% increases since last 14 days. So not going in the right direction. And anytime you see increases in the most populous counties is when we should be concerned. In terms of per capita, Uinta leads the way. Kane County is second. They saw a bit of an increase as well, but again, case numbers aren't a lot, but still, 27 per 100,000 is not great. Then Weber shows up third. Weber is part of the Wasatch Front, so that's concerning. Then Duchesne, Carbon, Joab. So, and then, a bunch of rural counties. In terms of the counties that saw the biggest increases, Morgan County saw a big increase. Carbon, Uinta, Kane, Summit County Even Park City seeing a bit of a surge. It would be interesting to see that. I need to look at the small area. If Park City, within Summit County, there's actually some variances, right? Park City has really high levels of vaccination, but surrounding areas, remember, Summit County isn't just Park City. There are other parts of Summit County that are very different than Park City, there are regions of Summit County that have high levels, but also regions with very low levels of vaccination. So it would be good to break that down. And I should have broken that down. I just didn't do it this time. Utah County shown up with a 61% increase. Same with Weber, Davis, and Salt Lake all shown up with increases. So we're seeing a real surge here. And that's confirmed by hospitalizations. We're seeing a bit of a little bit of an increase in hospitalizations. Like I said, we're not going to see these peaks that we saw over the winter. We're just not, because we vaccinated most of the at-risk population. Okay, but by all indications, did I have the? Oh, yeah, I did have. Test positivity has gone up. The test positivity is now at 5%. Some of that is driven by less. We're just doing fewer tests. But it seems to be also a function of increasing numbers as well. So we're seeing a bit of an increase. Hugely concerning, not hugely concerning, but we're definitely seeing an increase. But again, this is a tale of two pandemics, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. I'll get to that in a second. But in terms of vaccination in Utah, we're slowly making progress. So this is last week. The bottom is this week. So we're now at the metric I like to use, over 12. So the eligible population, 61% have received at least one dose of the eligible population. And 51, more than half, have received both doses. So that's, to me, positive news. And that compares kind of middle of the road when you look at the rest of the country. If you just look at over 12, if you look at just the eligible population, we're kind of middle of the road. If we look at overall population, because we're such a younger population, that puts us near the bottom of states. But again, I don't think we can compare Utah to, say, Idaho or Wyoming or to the Deep South in terms of vaccine hesitancy. We're not there. So that's good news for Utah, at least. Idaho, not so much. So by county, you can see, and I'll rerun the small area data from next week, because I think that's a really fascinating analysis to look at small areas. So you can see Summit County leads the way. Eligible over 18. They don't have over 12, they're just over 18. This is, I believe, the Washington Post site. 69% compared to Pike, which is at 30%. What's really concerning, though, is the over age 65. In Pike County, only 44% over the age of 65 are vaccinated. Those remaining 56% are at high risk. And that's really concerning. Garfield County is only 43% over 65. Salt Lake's not doing terribly. They're second, 51% over the age of 18 and 40% overall. Then Grand County, Davis County. So the Wasatch Front counties are represented pretty well here, as well as a few, there's some surprises, like Wayne County is doing okay, Daggett County is doing okay, Morgan County is doing okay, but then you have, San Pete and Paiute County, which are doing horribly in terms of vaccination. By age groups, again, as you go down in age, the less likely they're to be vaccinated. Some of that is due to the fact that eligibility for the younger populations has only recently opened up, but that's becoming less and less of an excuse. There's just more and more hesitancy among younger populations because they think they're not susceptible. And that's what's going to drive. So again, when you look at the UK data, the vast majority of folks who are hospitalized are younger. We saw the same thing in Michigan during this last surge. Those who are hospitalized, those with serious cases, tended to be younger during the second surge. Why? Because the older populations are vaccinated and more protected. The younger populations, not so much. So that is our challenge right now. You look at percent full, receiving one dose, 12 to 18, only 3% received one dose, as opposed to, 70, 79, 92%. So that's really, really great, but this is not great. So you can see the numbers just go down very consistently by age group. 50 to 59, about 72%, 40 to 49, 63%, 30 to 39, 55%, 19 to 29, 50%. Yeah. So we need to get those younger ages vaccinated. That's the challenge right now. Now, again, in Utah, same thing. Seeing this recent increase, the vast majority are in unvaccinated. Okay, deaths, hospitalizations, most of the new cases are among unvaccinated. For those with vaccines, it is very safe. And again, that correlates with the data coming out of the UK that these vaccines are highly effective against all the variants. And so if you have the vaccine, things are looking really, really great. If you haven't had the vaccine, you're just playing Russian roulette. Yeah, since March 23rd, only 1,013 breakthrough cases out of 28,233 total COVID cases. 96.8% of new confirmed COVID-19 cases have been among unvaccinated. And that's a trend that we're seeing all over the place. 95% of hospitalizations, 98% of all deaths among unvaccinated. And this correlates with data coming out of national sources. Cleveland, I shared this with you a couple weeks or last week, 99.7% of hospitalizations were unvaccinated. I believe this is Colorado, 97% of all new COVID cases, unvaccinated. What's going to happen is that this trend is going to be accelerated because of Delta. Again, Delta is not going to affect the unvaccinated much. The unvaccinated, though, it's going to be more efficient. Even if we increase the number of people who have vaccines, because the efficiency of transmission, it's just going to go around that population more efficiently, and you're going to see surges. It becomes more dangerous for unvaccinated folks. And we don't have enough vaccinated folks to protect them. Okay, the herd immunity equation now changes. We're now looking at, with more transmissional variants, we're looking at 80, possibly 90% of the population that has to be vaccinated for infections to be controlled. So that's where we're at. This is an interesting article. This was published a few weeks ago. Can the USA return to pre-COVID-19 normal by July 4th? What they estimate, so this was a simulation. What happens if we open everything up? Sorry, let me get my notes here. Oh, here it is. No, that's not it. There it is. Shoot. All right, no big. What happens if we open up, no restrictions, and everything goes back to normal by July 4th? What they predict is that, and this is given the vaccination rates that we have, what they predict is surges that may exceed the worst surges that we saw over the winter. But what they emphasize is that, and this is, I think, the key here. However, let's see. Yeah, hospitalization death, although lower than the previous wave, would still be substantial. Under unvaccinated individuals level on July 4th, we still project a surge with a peak incidence comparable to that observed in April 2021, with considerably lower hospitalization. However, we found that social distancing measures could be lifted for all individuals in early September without risk of significant surge. So our results demonstrate that relaxing social distancing measures for vaccinated individuals would have minimal impact on incidence. So among vaccinated, we're fine relaxing social distancing measures. Among unvaccinated, however, it's going to result in surges. But again, the big burden of this will be on unvaccinated. That said, again, and I just keep emphasizing this because people keep saying, well, that's, then they get what they deserve and it doesn't work that way. As long as there's virus circulating in the population, it increases the risk for breakthrough infections among those who are vaccinated, particularly among those who are immunocompromised, who had transplants, where the immune response may not be as robust after vaccination as in other folks. So those folks are at greater risk. So there is a bleed over effect. Okay, those unvaccinated folks, no, the virus circulating in that population will affect vaccinated folks. And that's not including the potential for new variants to show up. As long as there are people, as long as there's viruses circulating between different hosts, the risks of those variants popping up increases. So we're not over this. But again, it is a very different experience now between vaccinated and unvaccinated. Okay, end this on some good news. So Novavax is finally, it's looking like they are prepared to release the results of their clinical trial and apply for FDA approval. That's great news. I mean, maybe not in the US where we have a surplus and it's not, but who knows? Maybe Novavax is a completely different technology. Okay, it is a completely different technology, proven technology. It's a viral subunit vaccine. It does not use genetic material at all. Okay, so it actually produces the antigens, the spike protein, outside of the body and then injects those inside of you. So in that way, it's a lot like a more traditional vaccine. By the way, the HPV vaccine uses the same technology as well as certain flu vaccines. So proven technology, cheap to make, easy to ramp up. We have the technology to do it. And also does not require the very strenuous storage and transportation criteria like the mRNA vaccines. So that's really good news. So in the US, it might appeal to some folks who say, well, this is a different technology. I feel more comfortable with this. Maybe. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in the US. However, globally, this can make a huge difference. This is another bullet in the chamber. Okay, sorry, gun reference. It's another tool, another weapon in our arsenal against COVID. Okay, and because it is so cheap to make, and Novavax is a small company. They don't have much of a manufacturing base. Their plan is to license the technology to manufacturers around the world. So that might work really, really well. It's like I said, it's a technology that's really, really easy to ramp up. The material, the manufacturing capacity is out there already. So it's not like the mRNA vaccines, which are very technical, very hard to manufacture in mass. It's something that can utilize existing materials and machinery to manufacture. So this is a big one. JC, to answer your question, it is a 2-dose vaccine. So that doesn't change. It is still a 2-dose vaccine. But again, this could really, really increase the number of vaccines available abroad, a highly effective one. The best news is it is very, very effective. This data is based on, because they did the clinical trials later when the variants were dominant. So a lot of the data that they collected was from this recent surge in the winter, mostly the Alpha variant, maybe a little bit of Delta. So these efficacy numbers are based on variants. So 90% overall efficacy and 100% protection, 100% efficacy against moderate and severe disease. That is phenomenal numbers, much better than the viral vector, quite honestly. So really good news. Now, this is based on 30,000 participants in the US and Mexico. Safety profile is very similar, maybe even slightly less than the mRNA vaccines. So really, really good news. Maybe, like I said, maybe not for the US. Maybe the US, it's not going to be as, it's not going to make much of a dent. I think the hesitancy is established now, and there are other challenges. But globally, this could be really, really helpful. So, all right. Any questions? Any comments? Well, as usual, thanks for participating. I actually ended it on time. I'm going to try to make these shorter and just
And I
focus.
had a question.
Okay, sorry, Deja. Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, Novavax. Where is the Novavax vaccine from? Where?
Novavax vaccines from the U.S. It's a small U.S. company, I believe, in Baltimore. No, Gaithersburg, so outside Washington. Yeah, it's a small company, very, very small. They don't have much of a manufacturing base, but what they're, like I said, what they're planning to do is license the technology to different manufacturers. And again, it is a vaccine that can be made very quickly, easily with existing materials. It's cheap. It is also, you can store it in normal conditions. So that's really good news. But it is a US based vaccine. Yeah. The company's out of Gaithersburg, Maryland, right outside DC. Okay. Like I said, I will put this on YouTube as well. It'll be on Facebook Live. So if you haven't seen it, well, obviously, if you're watching it now, you've seen all of it. But anyways, yeah, it'll be on there if you want to repeat parts of it. Otherwise, I will be back next week with more news. I'll try to make these shorter as time goes on. Just focus on the relevant news and relevant numbers, because again, you know, there's still a lot of news out there. It's still a lot going on, especially among the unvaccinated. So I'll keep doing these until I stop, which is, I don't know when that'll be. So otherwise, please enjoy your weekend. Try to stay out of the hot weather. If you're in the West here, it's pretty roasty. Otherwise, I'll see you all next week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Han.
Welcome.